we're going to go ahead and get started. And I have it. That's not good. It's dropping lots of frames. That is very bad. Okay, it's coming back. All right, we'll make it work. Okay, so this is SolidWorks. This is the blank screen that you see when you open up SolidWorks. First thing you're going to do, we're going to get started with normal stuff. Go ahead and do File, New. And this menu is actually really important because unlike Word and most things you've ever used, there are several different file types you can manipulate in SolidWorks. So the first few, you see the part, you see this thing that says assembly, and then yours will probably just have a drawing or something similar to like that. You may have like a different mode that you can go into. So you can put it into, where's the other way to do it? Oh, there's like a novice button, there we go. So that's what a lot of you may see. Same thing. The advanced option just lets you have different templates later on in the future, but we can use novice for now. Go ahead and open up a part and hit OK. All right, so you all should be seeing something that looks like this. It looks like a big blank window, and now there are a bunch of buttons, and you don't know what they do. That's a good thing. So this is the entire blank universe. If you actually click and scroll, you're actually zooming in and out of space, but there's nothing there for your like reference, so you can't actually tell that. So what we're going to do first is we're going to make a sketch. So basically, SolidWorks allows you to manipulate things in 3D, but first you have to draw things in 2D to kind of tell it where the third dimension is going to come in from. So if you click on the little sketch tab over here, and then click sketch here, you get these 3 planes. These are your 3 origin planes. So you get the front, top, and right. If you middle click, you can rotate around. You can get all over the different ones. Go ahead and click on, where do you want to go? Go ahead and click on the front plane. It should basically light up in an orange rectangle. Get really used to looking at the highlighting of different things in SolidWorks. That's how it tells you kind of what's going on, is it's going to highlight different colors and different things. The colors don't always mean something, but sometimes they do. Once you click there, you'll see it kind of pans the camera in, and now you're at this two-dimensional, you're kind of on this two-dimensional plane here. Up here are all your drawing tools. They may look a little bit different depending on how it's set up on the default computer, but they're all basically there. So this one right here is a line. You can click and drag a line out. It'll allow you to dimension it and do some other things. That little check mark tells you you're done with the tool. And then go ahead and click on it. And then to delete stuff, because it's really important, is to hit delete. Okay, so everybody get the rectangle tool, corner rectangle, and draw a box. I don't really care what the dimensions are. You don't have to make it huge or anything. We just need a box. Scroll wheel zooms, again, use it. If you end up doing SolidWorks on a laptop, you will want to start carrying a mouse with you. Not having a scroll wheel makes SolidWorks pretty much impossible to use. Okay, so we're not going to worry too much about sketch stuff. I just want to get us to where we actually have a 3D part really fast. So over here in the different tabs, we're going to click on Features, and we're going to click on Extrude Boss Base. And that's going to kind of bring it into this 3D perspective, so you can kind of start seeing depth in it a little bit. And right over here on the left is where you'll be able to actually put in how deep of a extrude you want it to be. So extruding is when you pull something out. So go ahead and type whatever number you want, doesn't really matter. 5 whatever units. We'll find out later if your guys are in inch or millimeter or whatever. Most of you should be in IPS right now. And if you click the check mark again, you should basically get a box. All right, did we get a box? What? We got a box? Yeah. Everybody have a box? All right, so you've made your first part. This part is not very useful. Don't put this part on a robot, it would probably weigh a lot. Well, it actually weighs nothing right now because you haven't told it what material it's made out of, but in general, you don't want to put this part on a robot. Let me see if my system works. No. Now my system works. That's weird. Okay, cool. Okay, so with this is the first three-dimensional part. So basically that same process of going into a sketch, drawing something, and then doing some other feature on it is pretty much the workflow that you do for most everything in SolidWorks. There's a lot of advanced stuff, but for the most part, you make a sketch, you do some sort of feature on it, either an extrude or a cut, or there's revolves, there's all sorts of different things that you can manipulate it with. But that same idea, basically sketching, drawing out a shape, and then going in and actually extruding it and doing some feature task on it. What else can we do? Okay, let's go back. So let's look at the screen a little bit and kind of walk through the navigation window that you have in front of you. So the stuff that will look familiar, you have your normal file menu up here that you have in every application you guys have ever used. File, edit, view, all of those. File is just the normal stuff you always use, save, all of that. SolidWorks gives you a nice list of your most recent parts. This gets really useful when you get to larger assemblies and larger parts when you're working on like a full robot. Being able to come down here and quickly grab like the full robot or some sub-assembly of it and open it up is nice. Edit is your standard edit menu. You won't use copy and paste and stuff as much as you would like. Same with undo and redo. I've never understood exactly what SolidWorks will let you undo and what it won't, but you'll be really frustrated at some point because you're just not going to be able to undo something. And you'll have to go back and like re-edit it yourself, which is not fun, but it will happen. The view menu is really useful because on occasion you'll get this little button that says hide all types touched, and you'll be really confused why you can't see a bunch of things that you normally see. Just go to view, click this button back, and you'll be able to see it again. But it hides like all your sketches, planes, and a bunch of other stuff, and it gets really annoying. Okay. Insert lets you put in features and lets you put in a bunch of other things as well. Most of the time, the things that you would normally get from the insert bar, you'll get from this main toolbar here. You won't have to go into insert to do it, but on occasion you will. Tools menu, the number one thing you're going to use in here is all the way down at the bottom is the options button. And that has a bunch of different things you can do once you start getting into it. There's a lot of different options you can set to customize it to where it feels right for you. Things like which way scroll zoom is, all sorts of things like that you can do in the options menu. Window, if you start working with a lot of different SolidWorks windows open, you can very easily cascade them or tile them or put them on split screens and stuff so you can work on different parts at the same time. Then the help menu, most of the time I end up just Googling help. There's a ton of tutorials and things, so whatever you want to do, just put SolidWorks, whatever task you want to do, and then there's normally either a written out tutorial or a YouTube video or something on it as well. There's a bunch of little quick launch buttons that are really useful. All open, new, save, all of that is up there so you don't have to go through the menus to get to them. And this is called your command manager. On occasion you'll lose your command manager and you'll be really sad, but it's normally off somewhere on some other part of the screen. So you can drag it around, but for the most part you should leave it up at the top. You may not have the same tabs down here that I do. To change what tabs are down there, at some point if you end up needing to and you don't know where they are, if you just right click you can add different tabs to them. The ones that I have on are the ones that I normally use, but like I don't use Dim Expert all the time, so I could get rid of it if I don't want it. But you could have a bunch if you want them. But if you're missing something and you don't know why, just go ahead and right click and you can add it in there. We'll go over what the different features do in a second and things. Same with the sketch things. So that's the command manager. There's room over here for different toolbars. SolidWorks is extremely customizable. You can put all sorts of toolbars and things all over the place. So if your screen doesn't look exactly like mine, don't worry. There's lots of different ways to do it. If you can't find a command in a button somewhere, there's also this window up here. Up on the upper right is the search commands window. And that'll let you actually just type and you can search different things. So if you want to extrude something, you can type extrude and it'll come up and you can just run it right from there. Also, please feel free to interrupt me at any point to ask questions or offer up something or whatever you want. I'm not worried about any of that. Okay. To the left is your main feature tree. So this carries all of the history about every part that's in SolidWorks and your full. When you start getting into big assemblies like the entire robot and stuff, all of it is outlined over on the left. You'll manipulate this a lot, almost as much as you manipulate your main window. So you can get different properties of things. This is where like you set your material. If you want to make this thing a piece of copper, you can. It'll do color and things for you as well. These little tabs up here allow you to do several different things. There's a properties one, configurations, let you set different configurations for a part. So you could have, if you built a robot that has an arm, you could have a set configuration where the arm is on the floor. You could have another one when the arm is up, and you would be able to switch back and forth through them really easily. And the whole appearance tab allows you to put like decals on things and all sorts of interesting things, but not necessarily useful things. All right. Down along the bottom here, there are several tabs. There's only just two, model and motion study. But if you start doing simulations and a few other things, you'll get new tabs here that are like basically change your window. So they may be selected down here. Namely, if you're doing like Solidworks is a pretty powerful program. It'll let you do what's called finite element analysis, where you actually break up all the parts into small nodes and analyze the forces acting on them. If you've ever seen those pictures that have like the green through red and all the parts of all the different colors and they're kind of bending, that's finite element analysis. You can do that using the simulation tool, which is in one of the Office products thing, and you can click on it and you can get simulation, stuff like that. And it'll pop up new tabs and there's all sorts of new things you can do. But again, that's more advanced stuff. There's a lot of different things in here. You can render out pretty pictures. If you've seen those on like Chief Delphi and stuff, people use Photo View 360 to do that. Okay, I think that's the main walkthrough through the interface at least. So let's go ahead and look at sketching a little bit more in detail. So let's make a new part again. Let's create a sketch on the front plane again. So now we're left with this sketch. What's the best thing? So we already saw what extrude does. So extrude is going to just pull something out in a single dimension. So if you have a square, it's going to make it a rectangle, that kind of thing. Let's take and draw a square again, but this time we're going to do a different feature on it. We'll actually make it a rectangle or a square, it doesn't really matter. And then instead of hitting extrude boss base, we're going to hit revolved boss base. This property manager over here is going to ask you for a few different things. One of the nice things about SolidWorks is if you hover over something, a lot of times it'll give you the tooltip you need to figure out what you're supposed to click on, because it's not always 100% obvious. In this case, it says axis of revolution. So you click in that window, and then you click over on one of the long sides of your rectangle. Then it'll kind of give you a preview of what it's going to do. So it's going to actually revolve the entire thing. So now we drew a rectangle, but we made it into a cylinder. So you can do this a lot with a lot of different parts that you would normally like turn down on a lathe or something. You can make a revolved part this way. So you could have different diameters going through the entire length of it. You can do a lot of different things to allow you to do that. Okay, so that's the revolve, and we know how extrude works. So we can also go back and we can undo. Let me bring this back. Okay, so if you undo, oh, there's an arrow up over here. Yep, that's undo. We can start looking at a couple of the different things we can do in Sketch. So we can delete the rectangle, we don't need that anymore. So if you select, oh, actually, something we can start with, because I actually, in terms of like not knowing how to do SolidWorks, I didn't realize this was important for a very long time, but this is actually really, really useful. So listen up. So depending on which way you actually click and drag, it selects parts differently. So if I start here in the upper left and I drag across, it'll only actually select things that are entirely contained in my rectangle. So when I select here, it only selects this far side. If I click over here on the far right and I click and drag, it gives me a different color box. It gives me a green box, and it actually selects everything that's partial. So it'll actually select all three things. So So it ends up being really useful if you, depending on if you're dragging left or right, depending on how you want to do selection. So if you only want one side of this, it's far easier to drag from the right and grab the whole thing than from the left, where you might get 2 lines instead. While we're talking about selection, as soon as you select something, it tells you what the selected properties are or the selected items are over here. It calls them entities, whatever, the selected stuff. You can add different relations to them. So right now they're not really defined in any way, so you could end up doing strange things with them. But if you tell it that if you select 2 lines like that, and then you tell it that they're perpendicular, they'll be perpendicular forever, no matter what dimensions you set to them and things. You could set them to be equal, and then they'll shrink to size. Now you have perpendicular and 2 sides equal, so you're forced it to be a square. And then from then on, no matter what you do over here, it's always going to be a square. You might be able to make it bigger or smaller, but because you've forced relations on it, it's always going to be a square. Clicking on any of those lines will let you go back in, and you can see the different relations that you've set in, so you can delete them. So if you no longer want it to be equal, you can delete it. And then when you go back through, you can stretch, and now you can make it a rectangle again. Let's see. The other thing inside of properties, as we're looking down this list, there's a button that says for construction. This will become your best friend. So what for construction does is it basically tells the feature part of it, so like the extrude and everything, to ignore that line. So that's just for you when you're sketching to be able to use it to add relations, so you can draw, so say you wanted a center line that went across here because you wanted to put a circle in the center of this rectangle. You could draw a line like that. If you're in a tool and you want to get out of it, like the line tool will let you keep going, hit escape, and it'll leave the line and it'll let you get back into it. If you click on this and you make this for construction, now that line basically doesn't exist to the feature tool. So if I try to extrude, it'll still let me. But if I were to not have that construction and I tried to extrude, it would make me select which one of those. But I can put it back on as for construction, and then it won't see that as part of the feature anymore. So now I can't select, I only have one object there now. So then if I wanted to transcribe a circle into it, now I have this center line, I know that it's centered this way. Solidworks is really useful and tells me that it has like a little click to center right there. So then I can put a circle in, here. And then if you want to extrude something with a circle, because that's a whole closed face, it knows that the circle's there, and basically won't let you extrude it. However, if you come back down to selected contours, you can tell it to grab everything if you want, or you can select which parts of it to extrude and things like that as well. But by default, it's pretty smart to know that you want to extrude a shape like this. Okay. Let's see, other tools that are going to be really useful inside of SolidWorks. So as we move over, this Trim Entities button allows you to cut different lines without basically deleting the entire object. So if you click Trim Entities, make sure it's on Power Trim. That's the one I use the most often. You can go through, and there's several different other ways that you can trim things as well. But Power Trim basically lets you use your cursor as kind of a razor blade to slice right through the lines. So it'll basically cut lines where there's 2 points. So now that we drew that circle in here, we can come through and we can cut it, and the rest of the line stays, but only the part that we cut goes away. So if you want to get rid of the half circle, if you want to get rid of that one, now we have just a half circle here. We can go back through and cut any other line we wanted to if we need to. If you end up cutting a line you don't like, go back to the line tool and just fill it back in as soon as I actually select the line tool. Oh, other useful things. Spacebar lets you flip your view around. It brings up this view cube. So if you hit the space bar, you can get to several different views. So if you're in a part and you want to go to the left, right, whatever, you can come up here and then you can just click on it and it'll bring you back to whatever face you want to be on. Let's see, what else do we need to work on? Okay. All right, we'll go through most of the other tools. All right, so if we go ahead and delete everything, get back to a blank canvas, let's look at what some of the other tools are. Oh, and another thing we didn't actually look at. So rectangle, by default, it gives you the two corner one that we were drawing. The little drop down arrow lets you draw several other ways to draw rectangles depending on what you're trying to do. So sometimes it may be better to have a rectangle that you start with the center point, then you draw out a corner. 3-point rectangles, all sorts of things like that, parallelograms. If for some reason you need to do that, that's the way to do it. Most of the time you can get by, 99% of the time you can use the 2-point rectangle and never have to worry about it, but it is there if you need it. We saw what...
You have audio on the screen, correct?
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Okay, all right, so a couple other things we haven't seen. So we saw circle, we saw line, and we saw rectangle. Straight slot basically just does 2 circles, but it connects them together with a line, so you tell it how big the slot's going to be, and then you can give it a diameter out this way. So you can very quickly draw a slot. Circle we did. Arc, there's a couple different ways to draw an arc. Center point arc works just fine for most things. And then you can draw around and get whatever arc you want to draw. This is one where you will often select a different one, because 3-point arc is also very useful, where you give it a line and then you tell it what the radius is afterwards. So drawing half circles and things gets really easy with that. Okay. Polygon tool, similar to what you would use in like Inkscape or any other graphics program. You can draw polygons, you can make a triangle, a hexagon, whatever shapes you need, it'll do it for you. Let's see. Yeah, you can tell it what type of circle to draw it in, which will basically let you determine what the dimensions are, which are nice, whether you want point to point or side to side, things like that. Okay. Splines get a little weird, but they are useful on occasion. Basically, it's the same type of spline tool if you ever used a graphics program. It's that same type of thing. These are really end up being very difficult shapes to machine on a robot. But if for some reason you need to make a, Pringle chip for some reason, you can. Ellipse as well, basic drawing of an ellipse. You get to basically draw the circle and then tell it how to skew it. A lot of these you end up not needing too often. For the most part, I stay pretty in the line, circle, rectangle area for most of what I do in the world, because circles let you drill square hole or drill round holes, and squares are what most people sheet material comes out of. Won't talk too much about sketch fillet, because there's a better way to do it after you've made the part. You can use the fillet feature to do it. But if we do need to sketch fillet, if you click on it, you can set the radius to something like 1/4 inch. And then when you come over a corner, maybe, what's happening? Oh, it's just really small. I'm just drawing way bigger than I thought. Okay, there we go. It'll cut the corner and make it round for you, which can be very useful, especially when you don't want to cut people when you're building robot parts. Okay, so... Alright, a couple other things that are nice as well. If we draw a circle and we draw a line next to said circle, so as you're drawing and sketching things, you'll notice SolidWorks does nice things for snap. So as you're moving around, it'll snap a little yellow bar down next to your cursor. That tells you that you're perpendicular, that tells you that you're vertical. Then you can escape and get rid of it. If we come over to mirror entities, it does exactly like you would expect it to do. You can select the circle, select what to mirror about, and then it'll give you one mirrored exactly on the other side of that. Again, really useful for making a lot of different robot parts. Just saves a lot of time in sketching, so you don't have to sketch every single one if you're able to use the mirror tool really quickly. Where's the mirror tool? It should be next to linear sketch, somewhere up over here. It may be hidden in yours. They do that sometimes. Do people find it? Okay. Okay. On that same note, you can also use the linear sketch pattern tool to go about sketching. So you want to select entities to pattern down here, and it'll sketch whole patterns and things for you. So like all of those nice pretty sheet metal robots that have all the crazy numbers of holes in them, that's all from being able to do things like this. What? Wow, I'm drawing in way too large of scale. Okay, 10 inch on circle. Nope. All right, 100 inch on circle. There we go. Okay, so you can see that you get nice long chains of holes like you would. One of the tricky things that I've had professional engineers who use Solidworks every day not know, once you do a patterned entity and you want to go back and edit it, it can be a little confusing to get to. So if you click on one of the patterned parts and you come over to this thing that has what we remember we called relations, where you had perpendicular and things like that, you can right click and go to edit pattern, and then it brings you back to this and you can edit it. You can drop it back down to 2 and it'll basically fix where your parts are and things like that. A lot of times being able to come in here and right click on things helps a lot. Same with the mirrored part doesn't let you do that, which it should, but it doesn't, which is kind of annoying. So once you mirror something, I don't know if there's a way to edit it inside of a sketch mirror. You can delete the relation and tell it it's no longer symmetric, but there's no way to just change what is being mirrored. Yeah, at different times in your CADing career, SolidWorks will pop up many warning windows. Oftentimes you'll have no clue what they mean. Read them. If you need to, copy down the text or screenshot it and paste it into Google, and it'll tell you at least closer to what it's trying to warn you about. It can use some language that's not always obvious at first glance at all. Okay, I think that gets us through. The other one we can do is on this drop down for linear sketch pattern, there's circular sketch pattern. So if you want to do a circular sketch pattern around that point, you can, and now it makes a circle of lines. So that can be useful in a couple different areas. Okay. How am I going to start breaking stuff? Okay, let's build. Okay, actually, if we still have our box open, or if we can just build another box, your choice. Either way, it should be pretty fast. We can go back into features and we can see a couple more things that this has on here that we can do once we have a full feature set. Let me know when you're back to having a box, or if you need help getting back to having a box. Ian, are you making a box? Okay, you have. Wow. Ian, how big do you make your box? Oh, actually, what am I talking about? Get back into Sketch. I forgot the most important thing about sketching. That's not good. All right. Thank you for saying 3847 inches. Okay, so we've just been randomly sketching things, which is fun, except doesn't actually help you make real-world parts. There's a really important button here called Smart Dimension. This is how you actually tell what units to actually make things. Everything we did, most of the time I would sketch something and then immediately click Smart Dimension and tell it what size to actually make it. So when you click the Smart Dimension tool, you can click any of the lines, drag out, and you can tell it how big it is. So if I only want this to be 2 inches wide by 4 inches tall, I can do that. And now you can change the dimensions pretty quickly. So you can do that with all things. If you draw a circle, you can then dimension that circle. One of the options you can set up is to where you can input dimensions as you go. So as I'm drawing this circle, it gives me a little box that I can type into, and then I can just hit 3 enter, and now that circle's fully dimensioned, and I don't have to do Smart Dimension on it every time. So it's normally the default option, but it's not always. If not, don't worry too much about it for right now. We can change that setting later. Let's see, what else did we not talk about? When you are sketching, if you drag a part around, it'll snap to different points. So if you want to put something on the corner, or if you want to move it differently, you can. It'll try to give you center lines. These little dash lines that it drags out will show that you're centered with that rectangle. So you can drop it in the center really easily. Again, if you click on 2 different things, you can make relations between them, so we can tell them that this circle and this line are tangent. And then when we move it, we can't move it too far, or the box comes with us now. Okay. That's actually a good one too. I missed all sorts of things in Sketch. Okay. This box right here is just saying when you delete it, you're also going to delete the dimension associated with it. Yes, that's fine. We don't need the circle, so we're happy. Another handy button, especially when you're making things like thin wall tubing, which a ton of robots are made out of if you're just going to make a piece of extruded aluminum square tubing, is this Offset Entities button. If you click on it and then select the square, we can tell it to put in a 0.125 wall, and now we have a rectangle that has a wall thickness, and it'll be 0.125 all the way around. So if we had an 1/8 inch thick tube that was 2 by 4, we could very easily do that. And then if we wanted to make it actually apart, when we go to extrude it, we could tell it we wanted 8 feet of it, and it would do that. So now we have a nice big 2 by 4 piece of whatever. We can then set its material if we want. You can come in here and tell it whatever it is, which would be 6063 maybe, why not? And now it has, now this is actually basically a full part. You could go to Home Depot and buy this. Well, maybe not 2 by 4, it's a little big. You could go to some metal distributor and buy this. And this would be basically the exact same part you would get from them. What did... I had something else I wanted to go over. Oh, right. The measure tool. This will also be one of the places you click a lot. It's one of the only buttons in Evaluate that I use very often. So in the Evaluate tab, there's a Measure button, and that gives you a tape measure that you can use anywhere in SolidWorks. So if you open up somebody else's part, like if you download a CAD file from, like you can download all of the Simbot's old robots. You could download their robots and you could start measuring different things and checking how big things were. It brings up this little window, and if you click on different lines or faces, you can actually see how long something is. And it'll show you out here that this is in fact 96 inches. So it's 8 feet, like I made it out to be. But you can also check things like, are things perpendicular? So it'll say those 2 items are perpendicular to each other, which can be really useful, because often you might have something that looks perpendicular or looks parallel, but then it's actually not, and then when you go to make it, it would be really bad. So being able to check with the measure tool and actually seeing that, yes, this is truly perpendicular, is pretty useful. It'll give you things you don't need also, like total area of everything you select. If you want to know the full area of this part, it'll give it to you. Again, probably don't need that, but there may be a time when you do. What else? Next to that is mass properties. So this is how everybody, if you CAD your full robot, you can get a pretty accurate description of how much you think it's going to weigh. So this 8-pound huge piece of aluminum weighs 13.5 pounds almost. And it's pretty good on density. So it's basically using the material density, figuring out the total volume of the actual material there, and does the calculation. When we start doing assemblies and things, and you see when you have you put in a motor or something, you're gonna have to tell it how much that weighs, because it's not gonna know based on the density of how much one of the sims weighs and things like that. But once you put in those things, it'll add it all up for you, and you can get a pretty reasonable account of what your robot looks like, or what your weight of your robot's gonna be. So you don't have to guess, and you won't be wrong when you actually get to competition. Okay. All right, so now that we've sketched, it doesn't really matter where you do this. If you have just a plain rectangle, or if you have something like I have, it doesn't really matter. But if you right-click on one of those faces, it'll bring up your full right-click menu, which is where you can also start getting acquainted with as well. So SolidWorks likes to prevent you from having to move your mouse all the way to the top sometimes, so it gives you kind of suggested items here. So you can hide and show it. So if you want it to go away, you can hide it. Now it's gone. Then you have to come back over here and hit the glasses again to show it. You can edit feature and edit sketch. So if you want to quickly change the dimensions, it'll let you edit the sketch, and then you can actually just very quickly do something like that. And then when you exit sketch, it'll auto update. Did I actually change anything? I don't actually know that I changed anything. I didn't change anything. Let's actually make that number different. There we go. So now I have a 3x4 tube, all by just changing that little dimension. You notice the extrusion stayed the same, so it basically it was able to figure out that all I did was change that dimension, and was able to interpolate that I still wanted it to be extruded the same way, into the same length and everything. So you can go back into parts and edit the sketch if you need to, the same way, and then you can make different things basically. If for some reason you got it off the first time, you don't have to redo everything. You can go ahead and edit it. What are the last couple things you need to know before you can make parts? Oh, right. So we've only done one feature on any one part. So we've made a cube, we made the cylinder, we did things like that. But most parts aren't that simple. So very rarely, besides for like a raw material, you're gonna have something that's just one extrusion or one revolve or things like that. So you have to start putting multiple features. To do that, you have to add sketches. So there's a couple different ways to do that. You can right-click and click on the sketch button there. You can also go up to sketch here, click on the sketch button there, and then click the face you want to make a sketch. So if you want to click on this side or something like that, now we have basically the same sketch interface we had before, except now we're actually doing it on the side of the part. So if we come in and draw, if we grab the half line, we can drag out and we'll see those little dotted blue lines so we know we're halfway through it. We could put a 1/4-inch hole there, and then we can tell it how far away from the wall it is if we want. We can say it's 1 inch away from the wall. And then with that, we can actually use this extrude cut button instead of the extrude base back in our features menu. So we have a couple more things open to us. Now that we're actually on a part, we can do cuts. So we have revolved cut and we have extrude cut. We don't have anything to revolve right now, so we're just going to extrude it. And the default is blind and 8 feet. So it's going to drill an 8-foot hole through, if there was anything back there, it would go right on through it. The preview basically shows you where you're at. So if you only wanted to do one face, you could change this to something that's less than the whole tube size, so like 0.5 inches, and now it's only going to cut through part of it. Where are we at? We have a question? Question?
How do you do that?
Oh, I'll go back. Okay, so let me get out of here. Okay, so if you're on the side of a part somewhere, you can either right-click and hit Sketch with a little sketch button right there, or you can click on it and hit the sketch button up in the top too.
What sketch button? Do you mean the 3D sketch on plane?
Nope. Are you in? Are you on the sketch tab in the command manager?
Yeah.
So on the far left, there should be a button that says Sketch.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you click that Sketch button, then you can click on a face, and it'll bring you into sketching on the side of a face.
Didn't do that for me.
Let me see
All
what
it did was turn brown.
Oh, you're already in the sketch.
Then why?
Okay. Okay, now we're going to do a regular sketch. Now you should be good to draw anything. Okay, now you're happy. Yeah, I'll go over that as well. So one of the ways to get out of, if you get into a weird feature set, on occasion, SolidWorks will put the exits over here. So kind of near the top right of your screen, there's an X and there's a back. So this is the exit. This is one of the exit sketch buttons. It does the exact same thing as this exit sketch button does. It does the exact same thing as right-clicking and exiting the sketch does. There's a lot of different. One of the kind of weird things in SolidWorks is there are numerous ways to do the exact same thing. So a lot of it is just finding personal preference and what your mouse happens to be closest to at the time, or what you remember lets you do what you want to do. So if you find yourself in some weird thing, it may be just over here hitting the X will cancel whatever you're doing. Let me get back to where I was. So I put a line in the middle. I made a 1/4 inch hole. We smart dimensioned it from this rail to 1 inch. And then we did a check mark. And then we're going to come back over into features and we're going to do extrude cut. Okay, so it defaults again to that 96-inch thing. And we can tell it different dimensions, like I said before. But the other thing we can do is here, it shows that it's a blind cut, which basically means it's not in relation to anything. It's just going to go straight off of a distance. It's completely blind, not referencing anything. It doesn't really care. But you don't have to do that. You can do others. So you can do through all, which will cut through whatever is in the part behind it. That's really useful if you just say, I'm drilling a hole all the way through it, I don't really care. You select through all, and then even if you change the shape, or if you change the shape of it later, it'll still drill all the way through whatever the part is. Then you get things like up to next, up to vertex, and up to surface. And those basically select different distances based on what's being cut out behind the part. So up to next gets the next surface, so it'll just cut through this one wall, because that's the next thing. Up to vertex allows me to actually select a point somewhere in the part, and it'll cut through to that. So in a more complex part, that might be useful. Up to surface, I'm able to select an actual surface, so like a face of the part, instead of just like instead of a line on the part, and it'll cut up to that line. Offset from surface gets a little weird. Some of the other ones you don't use all that often. For the most part, you'll stay with blind, through all, up to next, kind of those type of things. There's also a through both. If you're sketching in the middle of a part, it'll basically be able to drill out both sides of the part, which can be useful. But that's not selected here because I'm on this side of the part right now. Right, so we go ahead and just cut one of those holes through. Doesn't really matter how you do it, as long as you get a hole. Does everybody have a hole in some part? All right, where are we? All right, we're gonna go back and start again and walk people through it. All right, so repetition helps everybody learn. Part new, you can click over on sketch and tell it to, we're gonna hit the sketch button. That's how we create sketches on the front plane. We can make a 2D rectangle again. We can go to features and extrude boss, and we can tell it whatever size we want. And when we check, we're back to having a rectangle, or having a rectangular prism. Thank you. No, it was a good catch. We can sketch again on the face of the part. We can draw whatever circle we want. Doesn't really matter if it's dimensioned right now, it can be. And then we can cut through it, and it'll basically do, if we do blind, it'll do it. If we do through all, it'll do it. And then it'll cut that hole. Yes?
So if you're like in sketch mode and you're just drawing like two random shapes, how can you figure out how far apart they are?
How can you figure out how far apart they are?
Yeah.
All right, let me get back into a sketch real fast. So if we have a second circle, and we use that smart dimension tool again, you can define the different distances. So if we say those are 0.5 apart, and then I can say that this one is, oops, that was off. Let's see. So I can say this first one is an inch from the wall, except that was not as much useful as it should have been. And this one, it has these nice little line things, so it'll tell you that they're on the same line. And then you can set this one to be an inch away from that one. Then if you would like, you can set different dimensions on them with the smart dimension tool. So if we're making a couple different 1/4 inch circles that are all an inch apart, we can do that. So one of the things is, since we didn't fully define this thing though, we only told it a distance apart of these two circles. So now I can kind of drag and I get some weird stuff that I don't necessarily want. So to fix that, we're going to use that for construction button that I showed you earlier. We can draw a center line across the front of this thing, or something close to that. If you miss center, if you hit horizontal, it'll get it back pretty close. Then we're going to tell it that it's for construction again. And we can do things like tell it that the point here in this circle, we can click on it, we can hit the control key and select the line again. So now we have both of those selected, we have the line and that point, and we can tell them that they're coincident. And that'll basically put that point on the line. If we do that again for this one, if we select the different point and select that line and we tell them they're coincident, we now end up with both of them on the line, and we know that they're both horizontal. We know they're both an inch apart. And since I was editing the feature that I had already created that had that cut, when I exit the cut, if I can click the buttons properly, it will give me 2 holes now because it auto-selected that I wanted both holes cut. If I didn't want to cut the second hole for some reason, I could go back in and I could right-click and do Edit Feature, and that'll let me come down here into Selected Contours, and I can deselect things and select only half of things or whatever else you want to do. But I actually do want to have those cut. Well, actually, let me delete that other circle, because I don't have a big enough block to do what I wanted to do. Well, I'll do it on the other one. Okay. When you minimize Solidworks parts, it's probably one of the most annoying features of this entire application is it decides to put them down here without any names whatsoever for the most part at most resolutions. So you kind of just have to guess. If Windows is working well, when you click down here, you'll actually be able to get the part names up. That doesn't always happen. Okay, so a couple of things to look at when you actually have a feature and you have another entity on it, like a cut hole. So again, like I said, there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. So we saw earlier that you can do a linear pattern of holes. If you sat there and you wanted to make in the sketch mode, you could make a pattern of holes going all the way down apart, and you could cut all of those out. The other way to do it is you can cut a single hole, and then you can do a linear pattern feature and tell it what direction to go. So this direction tool right now is blank, but if you tell it what direction to go, and then you can give it a distance, you can tell it how many. We can do whatever, 95 of them. And that'll put holes all the way down my 8-foot long piece of stuff. And I can hit just done, and now I have a ton of holes, and I did that much faster than sketching every one of them, possibly even than just doing the linear sketch stuff, because you have to deal with a much bigger sketch that way. Couple things. So this happens pretty regularly. I lost my part. I don't know where it went. You will at some point lose your part in Solidworks. You'll be sad for a little while, then you remember the fancy button up here. So this is one of your view buttons, and this is zoom to fit. If you click the zoom to fit button, it brings everything back, which is very happy, because otherwise your part's gone, and that's sad. Some days you'll lose your part because you end up having, if you end up with 2 parts in an assembly or something that are really, really far away from each other to where they're so small that even when you zoom to fit, they still can't be seen, that's just not fun. There's ways to deal with it, but it's less than pleasant. We'll probably get there at some point this weekend, because it happens to everybody at some point. We didn't really talk about this view bar very much at all. So we started with the zoom to fit button that brings everything that's in your whole universe, basically, whatever that part universe is, into view. The zoom to area allows you to drag and click, and then it'll zoom in on just that area. Previous view lets you switch between different views if you want to back up and go to different ones. We'll deal with section view later. That's where you can kind of make the fancy cross sections of different parts and things, but we don't really need to do that while we're just doing modeling stuff right now. View orientation is the same thing that the spacebar does, if you have it set to use the view selector. This guy just kind of lets you see different ways that the part can be viewed. So you can have one that has the lines, you can have one that doesn't. Taking off the actual outlines of the parts give you a bit more realistic look for the part, because things in real life don't have outlined edges. But you can also make wireframes and things as well that sometimes gives you a little bit better view of what you're trying to do on a part. So all up here, right along underneath the command manager, there's a bunch of different view buttons. It'd be nice if there was a way to make this bigger on the TVs, but I don't know how to do that. No, that's not going to happen. All right. Okay, display state. This hide show items button is actually the same stuff you get from the view menu, and I've always just done it from over here when I click view instead of clicking on it here, because then I have to remember what all these symbols mean, and I don't remember what half these symbols mean ever, because they're tiny and small. It hovers over and lets you see them, but if it works for you, feel free to use it. I never really do. Same with this guy. This brings up the full appearance manager. So if you want to make pretty colored parts, you can. Same with this is how you change backgrounds. So if you want to get really fancy and make weird backgrounds for your part as well, you can. Except I clicked on the same one we were already running. Sometimes. Why is it not letting me? Apparently it doesn't want to let me have backgrounds today. Alright, whatever. Normally that would let you set backgrounds. The backgrounds aren't really that useful. Sometimes it's useful if you don't have, if you can't see something because the background's not letting you. Depending on your computer, you'll have different view settings here that you can basically make your parts look nicer. You can add shadows, ambient occlusion. Basically simulates light, so it'll add shadows on different parts of the part, so it makes it a lot more realistic. Perspective changes your view. Can't really see it with just a bar, but it puts it into perspective view, so you get it like it's almost like a sketch. Okay, let me get it back to not being purple. So if you ever want to clear an appearance, is what like the different colors and stuff are called. If you right click on whatever the part is, there's a little balloon here. And if you click on the X next to whatever the color is, it goes away and it gets back to its default. the other useful one? Okay, so the other really useful feature that we'll use a lot is called fillet. So we had sketch fillets before, but now we can select many different edges on a three-dimensional part, and you can tell them all to be the same dimension. You can select whole faces, and it'll select all sides of it if you want to, and you can make nice rounded corner bits, especially on parts that are going to be sanded and things like that. You don't want to cut people. On a piece of extrusion, probably not necessary, but on parts that you actually make, you definitely want to put fillets and nice round corners and things in.